Hi everyone, George here from Locked On Art, and in this episode of Quick Builds, I'm building a Soviet self-propelled gun, the SU-76M. Now this kit from the Russian company Zvezda is in the 1:100 scale. The box is about twice the size of the other models in this line, and you'll see why when we take a look inside the box. There is actually 2 sheets of sprue. There's quite a few parts to this model, and there's a lot of detail in there as well. And it also comes with a basic set of instructions. There's no glue required with these kits, they're all snapped together. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get all the parts off the sprue and then clean them up. So what I'm doing here is I'm eliminating that seam line that's running down the length of the tracks. There's some ejection pin marks that need to be removed from the firing compartment. Now just before I assemble the model, these exhaust pipes, and especially in winter, were usually wrapped in a fire retardant asbestos cloth. So I'm just going to replicate that now with a bit of masking tape. So that's the basic tank made, but what I'm going to do next is I'm going to add a few extra details before I start painting. So I'm going to add a few of the storage loops that are at various points around the tank, and what I'm using is 0.2mm brass wire. Now to make the loop itself, I'm wrapping it around some very fine dental floss, just to give me that shape. So once I've got it at that stage, I can cut it to size, and then using a razor blade I'm going to bend it into that angled position. So I've roughly estimated that I need about 14 of these made. So that's how it's looking with all the loops on it now, and I needed 18 in the end. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to make some Fender Supports with some brass sheet. So that's how it's looking now. All the brackets have been installed. And I've also upgraded the exhaust brackets as well. So I'm going to be giving this one a winter theme, and to go along with that, I've sculpted a canvas cover on the side here, and also constructed a frame to support the canvas cover. So here are the pieces all ready to go, and first I'm going to hit it with a bit of Mecha Primer from Vallejo. So after giving the surface a light sand just to smooth off some areas, I'm going to put a base coat down. I've got some Vallejo Model Air colours. I'm using Russian green for the base, and for the post shading I'm going to be using light green, green and black green for underneath. Now with this particular brand of paint, it is very thin and translucent, so I have to build up the colour in a few small layers. And starting the post shading off with green. Black green for the underside. And finally some light green just for the very tops. So I'm going to be putting some speckling techniques onto the tank now, and I'm using oil paints just so they don't react with the acrylic. I'm using Winsor & Newton oils. I'm just trying to create a lighter shade of the base coat, and I've got white, sap green, a bright yellow and a raw sienna. I'm just going to mix those together. Then I'm going to take some of that mix and dilute it, and this is the mix that I'm going to use first. So I just loaded up a small brush and I'm going to spray it on using a toothpick. And what this is going to do is it's going to simulate faded and lightly chipped paint. And then I'm going to come in with the thicker original mix and give it some very fine, smaller specks. There's a few larger ones that I don't want there, so I'm just going to remove them using a bit of thinner. So now I'm going to add some chipping to the edges using that light green. And now I'm going to go back over those areas with a black grey just to simulate the exposed metal. So now I'm going to paint a few small details in the fighting compartment, so then I can mask it off and start the whitewash. So I'm just going to add a couple of coats of TS13 clear. So I'm just taking a brush now that I've dipped into acrylic thinner, and it's quite a firm brush, just to scrape away that white paint. So what I can do now is I can come in with a little bit of pure white and just touch up some of those areas in the middle, and it will just give another level to the whitewash. I'm going to switch back to oils now and tie all that work in with a little bit of speckling. And just removing the dots from the exposed green parts with a wee bit of thinner. Okay, so it's time to colour in all of the details now, and I'm using a black grey for the tools and the towing cable. So I've just added another clear coat to it, and now I'm going to add a pin wash. So I've got some black and burnt umber oil paint thinned down with a wee bit of white spirit. And just taking a clean brush dipped in spirits, I can wipe away the excess and the messy parts that I don't want. So I've now let that dry overnight, and now I'm going to move on to weather and grime streaks. So the method for this technique is to dab little bits of oil paint at the tops of areas and then with a wet brush just brushing it downwards. And on those green areas it's good to do a little bit of white. So this next stage is going to bring a bit of life to the project. I'm going to be using a few different pigments to do the underside and under the fenders and around the tracks. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to apply some light grey paint just to act as sort of a dull metal, and it will be a nice contrast from all the pigment weathering. And I'm just mixing up a few different shades using Vallejo white and the black grey. So I've got some pigments here from MIG Productions. I'm going to start off with the black smoke, standard rust and light rust, and then I'll move on to the earth and dirt weathering. So I'm using black pigment as a wash, just doing all those crevices and areas. And then I'm also going to speckle some of that on, so it blends in with that wash. And then come in with a little bit of standard rust, speckle that into some areas, and then add a very small amount of light rust. I'm going to blend some of those areas together. And I'm going to keep adding washes and more speckling effects until I'm happy with the result. Also, what you can do is you can add, while it's wet, some dried rust pigment just to give a bit of texture. Now I'm just going to give the whole area a dust wash. And the same with the tracks as well, just give it a light dusting. Right, so I'm going to be adding the mud effects now, and I'm going to use the light dust to speckle over mainly the bottom portion and under the fenders. And with the darker mud. And I've also added a little bit of fine sand in there just to give it a wee bit more texture. So I've cleaned up the wheels a little bit, and now I'm going to dry brush on some Model Air steel onto the tracks. So here is the final product. I've had a lot of fun making this guy. I've been able to add extra details, and adding a whitewash has really given it some character. I hope you've enjoyed watching this episode, and please consider subscribing if you haven't already. I'll see you in the next episode, and until then, thanks very much for watching.